Imagine this. You wake up one morning and suddenly become aware of something you've never truly noticed before. The voice inside your head is speaking. Not just speaking, but narrating everything. It's commenting on the weather, judging your reflection in the mirror, rehearsing conversations that haven't happened yet, replaying ones that ended years ago. It's restless, opinionated, never silent. And then, in a moment of strange clarity, you ask yourself a question that fractures everything you thought you knew. Who is that speaking? You pause. You listen more carefully. The voice says, "I need coffee. I look tired today. What will they think of me?" But who is the I that needs coffee? Who is observing that you look tired? And who, exactly, is concerned about what others think? If you are the one listening to these thoughts, then who is the one speaking them? The moment you try to locate the source, something unsettling happens. You realize you cannot find it. The voice seems to be you, and yet you are also somehow separate from it, listening to it as if it were another person whispering in your ear. In this video, we will explore one of the deepest riddles of human existence, the mystery of consciousness and the haunting question posed by great thinkers like Jiddu Krishnamurti, Carl Jung, and countless sages through time. Who is speaking inside your head? Is it really you, or is it the conditioning of society, the voices of your parents, the weight of culture, and the echoes of memory disguised as identity? Stay with me until the very end, because the final insight we will uncover is perhaps the most powerful of all, one that can radically shift how you perceive not only your mind, but also life itself. Before we dive in, if you are passionate about self-discovery, about unveiling the truth behind your thoughts and actions, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and share this video with someone who, just like you, seeks to understand life on a deeper level. And do not forget to comment your reflections along the way, because the dialogue we open together is just as important as the words you hear. Now, I promise you that as we unravel these mysteries, you will encounter revelations that may completely change how you see the world and even how you see yourself. This is not a trivial puzzle. This is the riddle that has haunted mystics, philosophers, and seekers for millennia. Krishnamurti spent his entire life pointing to this mystery, urging people to investigate the most intimate thing they believe they possess: their own mind. He would ask his audiences with ruthless simplicity, "Are you aware of the thinker, or are you the thought itself?" Most people never even consider the question. They live their entire lives assuming that the voice in their head is them, their identity, their essence, their self. But what if that assumption is the greatest illusion you've ever believed? Consider this. If you were truly the master of your thoughts, could you stop them right now? Could you command your mind to be silent for the next 60 seconds completely, utterly silent, and have it obey? Try it. Close your eyes and attempt to think of nothing. Within moments, a thought intrudes. Then another. "This is hard. Am I doing it right? What's for dinner? I wonder if I locked the door." The thoughts flood in without your permission, like uninvited guests crashing a party you never intended to host. If you are the one thinking, why can't you control what appears? Why do thoughts seem to have a will of their own, arising and vanishing like waves on an ocean you didn't create? Here's where it gets even stranger. The thoughts that appear are not even original. Listen closely to that inner voice right now. Notice its tone, its judgments, its anxieties. Whose voice does it sound like? Is it your father's disapproval echoing through the years? Your mother's worry imprinted so deeply you've forgotten it wasn't yours to begin with? Is it the voice of a teacher who once told you that you weren't smart enough, or a culture that convinced you that you must achieve, accumulate, and perform to be worthy? The voice you believe is uniquely, intimately yours may be nothing more than a collage of borrowed words, inherited fears, and conditioned responses, a recording playing on loop. So familiar, you've mistaken it for your identity. And yet, you defend this voice as if your life depends on it. When someone criticizes you, the voice leaps to your defense or turns against you with even harsher judgment. When you face a decision, the voice debates endlessly, weighing options, predicting outcomes, replaying past failures. It promises you control, certainty, safety. But does it deliver? Or does it trap you in an endless cycle of doubt, fear, and second-guessing? How many nights have you lain awake, tormented by this voice rehearsing scenarios that will never happen? How many moments of joy have been stolen because the voice insisted on analyzing, comparing, or worrying about what comes next? What if the voice you trust so completely is not your ally, but your jailer? What if everything you think defines you, your personality, your beliefs, your sense of self is constructed by a mechanism you never consciously chose? And if that's true, then the most urgent question of your life is not, what should I do? Or how do I succeed? But rather, who am I, really, beneath the noise? This is the riddle of consciousness. It is not an abstract philosophical exercise. It is the living question that, when pursued with total honesty, has the power to dismantle everything you thought you knew about yourself, and in that dismantling, reveal something far more real, far more free than the mind could ever imagine. To understand why this voice dominates your inner world, you must first confront an uncomfortable truth. You were never meant to think for yourself. Not really. From the moment you drew your first breath, you were submerged in a vast ocean of conditioning language, culture, beliefs, expectations, all designed to mold you into a functioning member of society. Your parents spoke to you in words they inherited from their parents. Your teachers repeated ideas passed down through generations. Your culture surrounded you with invisible rules about what is good, bad, successful, shameful, worthy, or contemptible. And slowly, imperceptibly, these external voices migrated inward, setting up residence in your mind until you could no longer distinguish between what you truly think and what you were taught to think. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein understood this when he wrote, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." Think about what this means. Every word you use to describe your experience was given to you. You did not invent the concept of success or failure, love or fear, self or other. These categories were handed down, pre-packaged, ready for you to adopt, without question. Language itself is not a neutral tool. It is a structure that shapes how you perceive reality. When you think, "I am anxious," you are not simply observing a feeling. You are filtering a raw sensation through a linguistic framework that immediately categorizes, judges, and solidifies it into an identity. The voice in your head speaks in borrowed words, describing a borrowed reality, reinforcing a borrowed sense of self. Carl Jung went even deeper into this mystery when he explored what he called the collective unconscious, a vast reservoir of inherited patterns, archetypes, and instincts that shape human behavior across all cultures and eras. Jung warned that unless we become conscious of these forces, we remain puppets dancing to strings we cannot see. He observed that most people live their entire lives acting out scripts written by the collective psyche, the hero, the victim, the rebel, the caregiver. These are not roles you consciously choose. They are patterns imprinted so deeply into the human mind that they feel like your authentic personality. But are they? Or are you simply performing a role assigned to you by forces far older and more powerful than your individual will? Krishnamurti took this insight even further. He insisted that what we call individual consciousness is a fiction. In his words, "You are the world, and the world is you." What he meant is that the fears, desires, and conflicts churning inside your mind are not uniquely yours. They are the shared conditioning of humanity itself. When anger arises in you, it is not your private anger. It is the same anger that has burned through human beings for thousands of years. When you feel the gnawing anxiety of not being enough, you are tapping into a collective wound that transcends your personal history. The voice in your head feels intimate and personal, but it is actually impersonal, a stream of human conditioning flowing through you, wearing the mask of I. This realization is deeply unsettling because it threatens the very foundation of identity. We cling to the belief that we are individuals, separate, autonomous, self-determined. But what if that separateness is an illusion? What if the I you defend so fiercely is nothing more than a patchwork of inherited ideas, stitched together by memory and called a self? Jean-Paul Sartre wrestled with this existential terror when he wrote about bad faith, the way human beings deceive themselves into believing they are fixed, defined entities when, in truth, they are radically free and undefined. The voice in your head offers the comforting illusion of continuity. I am this kind of person. I have always been this way. This is who I am. But Sartre knew that this is a lie we tell ourselves to escape the dizzying freedom of existence. You are not a fixed self. You are a process, a flux, a continuous becoming, and the voice that claims to know who you are is simply repeating old stories to avoid the terror of the unknown. Arthur Schopenhauer saw this trap from another angle. He argued that beneath the surface of rational thought lies a blind, insatiable will, a force that drives all living beings towards survival, reproduction, and dominance. This will does not care about your happiness or fulfillment. It cares only about perpetuating itself. The voice in your head, with its endless worries and desires, is not serving you. It is serving the will's agenda. It keeps you striving, competing, fearing, wanting, never satisfied, because satisfaction would mean the end of striving, and the will cannot tolerate that. The voice promises that if you just achieve this goal, acquire that thing, or become that person, you will finally be at peace. But the peace never comes, because the voice is not designed to give you peace. It is designed to keep you in motion, forever chasing, forever dissatisfied. This is the hidden problem. The voice you trust as your guide is actually your captor. It is a mechanism of control, installed by society, reinforced by culture, and sustained by your own unconscious identification with it. And the most devious part? It convinces you that you are choosing, you are deciding, you are in control, when in reality, you are being moved by forces you have never examined. The voice is not your servant. You are its prisoner. And until you see this clearly, without denial or rationalization, you will remain trapped in a cycle of psychological suffering that no amount of external success can ever resolve. The consequences of living under the tyranny of this inner voice are far more catastrophic than most people realize. It is not merely that you experience occasional anxiety or self-doubt, though those are symptoms. The deeper tragedy is that you are living a life that is not truly yours. Every decision you make, every emotion you feel, every relationship you form is filtered through a lens of conditioning so thick that you have never once seen reality as it actually is. You have only seen reality as the voice interprets it, and that interpretation is always distorted by the past. Consider how this plays out in your daily existence. Something happens. A colleague makes a dismissive comment. A partner forgets an anniversary. A stranger cuts you off in traffic. The event itself is neutral, a simple occurrence in the flow of life. But the voice does not allow neutrality. Immediately it begins its commentary. They don't respect me. I'm not valued. This always happens to me. I'll never be appreciated. Notice what just occurred. The event was singular and brief, but the voice has transformed it into a narrative about your entire identity, dragging in memories from years ago, projecting fears into the future, and creating a story of victimhood or injustice. The suffering you experience is not caused by the event itself. It is caused by the voice's relentless interpretation of the event. Neuroscience confirms this ancient wisdom. Research into what scientists call the default mode network reveals that when the brain is not focused on a specific task, it automatically generates self-referential thoughts, the endless mental chatter about me, my past, my future, my problems. This network, which includes regions like the medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate cortex, becomes hyperactive in people suffering from depression, anxiety, and chronic rumination. The more you identify with the voice, the more these neural pathways strengthen, creating a self-perpetuating cycle. Your brain literally rewires itself to prioritize the narrative over direct experience, the story over the truth. This is why so many people report feeling disconnected from life, even when their circumstances are objectively favorable. You might have a comfortable home, meaningful work, loving relationships, and yet there is a persistent sense that something is missing, that you are somehow separate from the fullness of existence. This is not a coincidence. The voice in your head creates a barrier between you and reality. It stands like a commentator between you and every experience, never allowing you to touch life directly. When you look at a sunset, the voice says, "Beautiful, but not as beautiful as the one I saw last year." When you embrace someone you love, the voice whispers, "How long will this last? What if they leave?" You are never fully present because the voice is always pulling you into the past or projecting you into the future. And in that perpetual displacement, life slips through your fingers like water. The societal consequences are equally profound. A world filled with people who are unconsciously identified with their conditioned voices is a world of endless conflict. When your sense of self is built on thought, on beliefs, opinions, ideologies, identities, then any threat to those thoughts feels like a threat to your very existence. This is why people become so defensive, so tribal, so unwilling to listen or question. The voices convince them that their beliefs are them, and to abandon a belief would be to annihilate the self. So they cling, they argue, they go to war not over reality, but over competing narratives, competing voices, all equally conditioned, all equally convinced of their own righteousness. Krishnamurti observed that this identification with thought is the root of all human conflict. When you believe that you are your thoughts, you inevitably see others who think differently as enemies. The voice divides the world into us and them, right and wrong, my truth and their delusion. But these divisions exist nowhere except in the realm of thought. A tree does not argue with another tree about which is the true tree. A river does not go to war with another river over ideology. Only human beings, trapped in the prison of conceptual thinking, create such absurdities, and we suffer for it, individually and collectively, generation after generation, repeating the same patterns of violence, greed, and fear, because we cannot see that the enemy is not out there, but within. In the voice that insists on separation, there is also a cognitive dimension to this trap, illuminated by modern psychology. Cognitive biases, systematic patterns of deviation from rational judgment, are essentially the voice's favorite tools of distortion. Confirmation bias ensures that you only notice evidence supporting what you already believe. The availability heuristic makes you overestimate the likelihood of dramatic events you've recently heard about. The fundamental attribution error causes you to judge others by their actions while judging yourself by your intentions. These are not occasional glitches. They are the standard operating procedure of a mind that has never been taught to observe itself. The voice is not a reliable narrator. It is a biased, selective, self-serving storyteller that warps every experience to fit its pre-existing narrative. Perhaps most tragically, the voice steals your capacity for authentic connection. When you interact with another person, are you truly listening to them? Or is the voice already preparing your response, judging their words, comparing their experience to yours, defending your position? Most conversations are not genuine exchanges, but parallel monologues, two voices performing for each other, neither truly hearing the other. Love becomes impossible when the voice is in charge, because love requires presence, vulnerability, openness, and the voice can offer none of these. It can only calculate, protect, and control. So you go through life surrounded by people yet profoundly alone, because the voice has erected walls around you that no one can penetrate. This is the unseen consequence. You are living in a prison of your own making, and the bars are made of thoughts you never chose. Every moment of suffering, every relationship that fails, every opportunity missed, every night spent in restless worry, all of it stems from this single source. The voice is not protecting you. It is destroying you, slowly, silently, relentlessly. And the worst part? You've been its willing accomplice, defending it, justifying it, mistaking it for your deepest self. But what if you could step outside this prison? What if there existed a way to see the voice for what it truly is? Not your enemy to be destroyed, not your master to be obeyed, but simply a mechanical process to be observed. This is where the rebellion begins, not with violence or suppression, but with a radical shift in perception that changes everything. Krishnamurti's approach was revolutionary precisely because it rejected all traditional methods. He did not offer meditation techniques, mantras, or practices. He did not suggest that you should control your thoughts, replace negative thoughts with positive ones, or train your mind through discipline. Why? Because any attempt to control thought is itself another movement of thought. The controller and the controlled are not separate. They are both products of the same conditioning. When you try to silence the voice through force, you are simply creating another voice, the voice of the controller, which says, "I must be quiet. I must not think." And so the conflict continues. The war within intensifies, and you remain trapped in the same pattern, only now with an added layer of struggle. Instead, Krishnamurti proposed something far more subtle and profound: choiceless awareness. This is not a technique you practice. It is a quality of attention you bring to the present moment. It means watching the voice without judgment, without trying to change it, without resistance or preference. When a thought arises, "I am not good enough," you do not fight it or analyze why it appeared. You simply observe it as you would observe a bird flying across the sky. The thought comes, the thought goes, and you remain as the silent witness, untouched by its content. This may sound simple, but it requires a quality of attention that most people have never cultivated. We are trained from childhood to react to thoughts, to believe them, to follow them wherever they lead. The voice says, "You should be worried about tomorrow," and immediately you are worried. The voice says, "That person wronged you," and immediately you are angry. There is no gap between the thought and your identification with it. They happen simultaneously, so quickly that you never notice the process. But in choiceless awareness, you create that gap. You become conscious of the thought as a thought, not as reality. And in that recognition, something miraculous occurs. The thought loses its power over you. Carl Jung understood this process through his concept of individuation, the journey toward becoming a whole, integrated self. For Jung, most people live fragmented lives, unconsciously acting out the dramas of their personal and collective unconscious. Individuation requires bringing these unconscious contents into the light of awareness, facing the shadow, integrating the rejected parts of yourself, and ultimately transcending the limited ego to connect with the self, the deeper, transpersonal center of being. This journey is not comfortable. It demands that you confront everything you have been running from: your fears, your wounds, your denied desires, your repressed rage. But Jung insisted that this confrontation is the only path to psychological freedom. You cannot bypass the darkness. You must move through it with eyes wide open. History offers us examples of those who walked this path and emerged transformed. The Buddha, sitting beneath the Bodhi tree, did not achieve enlightenment by controlling his thoughts or perfecting his character. He achieved it by observing the arising and passing away of all phenomena, thoughts, sensations, emotions, without clinging to any of them. He saw that suffering arises from attachment, and attachment arises from identification. When you stop identifying with the transient contents of consciousness, suffering ceases, not because circumstances change, but because the one who suffers is recognized as an illusion. Similarly, the Stoic philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, taught that freedom comes not from controlling external events, but from mastering your responses to them. Epictetus famously said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." But this is not mere positive thinking. It is a recognition that the voice's interpretation of events is optional. You can observe the thought, "This is terrible," without believing it. You can notice the impulse to react without being compelled by it. In that space of non-reactive awareness, you reclaim your sovereignty. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, discovered this freedom in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. He observed that even when everything external could be taken away, possessions, health, family, dignity, one thing remained inviolable: the freedom to choose one's attitude toward what is happening. The voice could say, "This is unbearable. I cannot survive this." But Frankl found that he could observe that voice, recognize it as thought, and choose not to identify with it. In that gap between stimulus and response, he found meaning, purpose, and ultimately, survival. If such freedom is possible in a concentration camp, how much more possible is it in the comparatively comfortable circumstances of your daily life? The rebellion, then, is not about fighting the voice. It is about waking up to the fact that you are not it. You are the awareness in which the voice appears. And that awareness is vast, silent, and free. The voice will continue to speak. That is its nature. But you no longer have to mistake it for truth, for identity, for who you really are. And now we arrive at the deepest revelation, the one that cannot be understood intellectually but must be experienced directly. You are not the voice, and you never were. Beneath the endless commentary, beyond the layers of conditioning, prior to every thought and memory, there exists a silent awareness that has been watching all along. This awareness is not something you need to create, cultivate, or achieve. It is already here, already present, already whole. It is the space in which every thought arises and dissolves, the light by which every experience is known, the eternal witness that remains untouched by the drama unfolding within it. When a thought appears, I am worried, I am not enough, I need to succeed. What is it that notices that thought? The thought itself cannot notice itself. A word on a page cannot read itself. A wave cannot observe its own movement. There must be something prior to thought, something that exists before the voice begins speaking, something that remains when the voice finally falls silent. This is what Krishnamurti pointed to when he said, "The observer is the observed." At first, this statement seems paradoxical, even nonsensical, but look deeply into your own experience, and you will see its profound truth. When you observe a thought, there appears to be an observer and an observed, a you, watching your thoughts. But if you investigate more carefully, you will discover that this division is itself a creation of thought. The moment you say, "I am observing my thoughts," you have created a new thought claiming to be the observer. But who is watching that thought? If you keep tracing it back, looking for the ultimate observer, you will find that it recedes like a horizon, always seemingly present, but never graspable as an object. This is because the true observer is not an object at all. It is the subject of all experience, the awareness itself, which cannot be turned into a thing to be known because it is the very knowing itself. This realization shatters the illusion of the separate self. The I you have been defending, protecting, and trying to improve your entire life is revealed as a phantom, a collection of thoughts claiming to be an entity, a story mistaken for a storyteller, a process pretending to be a permanent thing. When this is seen clearly, not as a concept but as a living reality, the entire structure of psychological suffering collapses. How can you suffer when there is no you to suffer? How can you be inadequate when there is no fixed self to measure? How can you fail when there is no separate entity to achieve or fall short? Carl Jung spent years exploring the depths of the psyche, mapping the ego, the shadow, the anima and animus, the archetypes of the collective unconscious. But toward the end of his life, he pointed to something beyond all these structures, what he called the self with a capital S, the totality that transcends and includes all opposites, the center that is simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. This self is not your personal identity. It is the universal consciousness expressing itself through the particular form you call me. Jung wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." But the deepest awakening is the recognition that inside and outside are not ultimately separate, that the awareness perceiving the inner world and the awareness perceiving the outer world are one and the same. This is why mystics across all traditions have declared that separation is an illusion. The Upanishads proclaim, "Tattvam asi," thou art that. The essence of what you are is not separate from the essence of all existence. The awareness in you is the same awareness in me, in every living being, in the totality of life itself. The boundaries you perceive, this is me, that is you, this is mine, that is yours, exist only in the realm of thought. In reality, there is only one consciousness, appearing as many, like the ocean manifesting as countless waves, each wave believing itself to be separate until it recognizes itself as the ocean. When this recognition dawns, life transforms completely, not because anything external changes, but because the one who is seeking, striving, suffering, and struggling is seen to be absent. The voice continues to speak. Thoughts continue to arise. Emotions continue to flow. But they are no longer mistaken for your identity. You watch them pass like clouds across the sky, knowing yourself as the sky itself, vast, unchanging, untouched by whatever appears within it. This is what Krishnamurti called the ending of the self, and it is not a loss, but a liberation beyond anything the mind could imagine. Consider what your life would be like if you lived from this awareness rather than from the voice. Fear would still arise. The biological survival mechanism would continue to function, but it would no longer paralyze you because you would recognize it as a passing phenomenon, not a permanent truth. Sadness would still be felt, but it would not become suffering, because suffering requires a story about the sadness, and you would see through the story. Desire would still move through you, but it would not become craving, because craving requires the belief that you are lacking something, and you would know yourself as the fullness itself. Relationships would transform. Instead of two separate selves trying to get something from each other, validation, security, pleasure, completion, There would be a meeting of awareness with itself, a recognition that the same consciousness looking out through your eyes is looking out through the eyes of the other. Love would no longer be a transaction, but a state of being, arising naturally when the barriers of separation dissolve. Conflict would become impossible, not because you suppress anger or disagreement, but because you would see that there is no other to be in conflict, with only consciousness appearing as different forms, each expressing its conditioning, none of it ultimately separate from the whole. This is not a state reserved for saints or sages. It is your natural condition, obscured only by the persistent belief that you are the voice in your head. Every moment of pure presence you have ever experienced, standing before a vast landscape, lost in music, holding a newborn child, gazing into the eyes of a lover, these were moments when the voice fell silent and awareness revealed itself. In those moments, you were not thinking about being present. You simply were present. There was no self, no separation, no story, only the fullness of what is. This is what you truly are. Not occasionally, but always. Not in special moments, but in every moment. Hidden only by the veil of thought. The final revelation is this. Freedom is not something you achieve in the future. It is not a state you reach through practice or discipline. It is the recognition of what has always been true, that you are not a small, separate self trapped in a body and a mind, but the infinite awareness in which all bodies and minds appear. The voice will tell you this is too simple, too good to be true, that surely there must be more work to do, more stages to pass through, more enlightenment to attain, but that is just the voice, trying to survive, trying to remain relevant, trying to postpone the recognition that would render it obsolete. Krishnamurti said, "Truth is a pathless land. There is no method to get you there because you are already there. There is nowhere to go, nothing to become, no one to transform into. There is only the seeing, the recognition, the sudden clarity that what you have been seeking has been seeking you, that what you have been looking for is what has been looking all along. The riddle of consciousness resolves not with an answer, but with a dissolution. The questioner vanishes, and what remains is the silence that has been present all along, waiting patiently beneath the noise. So the next time the voice begins its familiar narrative telling you who you are, what you lack, what you must do, pause, listen, and ask, who is listening to this voice? In that asking, without reaching for an answer, without making it another thought, you may discover the truth that no words can capture. You are the awareness itself, timeless, boundless, free. You always have been. You always will be. The only question is, will you recognize it? This is the ultimate truth, the final and most powerful realization. Not something to believe, but something to see. Not something to understand, but something to be. And in that being, the riddle of consciousness is solved not by finding an answer, but by discovering that the question itself was born from the illusion that you were ever separate from the answer. You are the mystery and the revelation, the seeker and the sought, the consciousness, asking, who am I? And the silence that responds without words. You are this. You are here. You are home. If this journey has stirred something within you, if you have glimpsed even for a moment the possibility that you are not the voice but the awareness beyond it, I invite you to continue this exploration. Subscribe to this channel, share this message with those who are ready to question everything, and leave your reflections in the comments below. Because this conversation, this dialogue between awareness and awareness, is how truth spreads not as doctrine, but as recognition. Together, in this shared awakening, we touch the essence of what it means to be fully, radically, completely alive. Thank you for walking this path with me. May you discover the silence within the noise, the peace within the chaos, and the freedom that has been waiting for you all along.